Opening up random signpost uncommons in pre-release and then building entire commander decks out of them should be how we start just going about all of our commander for the rest of time. Now that I'm done with the Edge of Eternities pre-release, I really want to talk about signpost uncommons and how fun they are to play as commanders. Now, if you don't know what a signpost uncommon is, let me go ahead and explain. You see, in a draft or a pre-release set for Commander, you have what are called signpost cards, because every deck is meant to be a 2-color deck. Generally, you can build 3 or 4 color, or you can build monocolor, but really they're designed to have 2-color decks for a variety of strategies. So in Edge of Eternities, the green and white 2-color combination was supposed to focus around 1/1 counters, and for white and black, you would have a go wide strategy, whereas for Izzet, you would have an artifact aggro strategy. But if you notice, for each of these archetypes, it gives you an example of a card from the archetype, and then it has the signpost uncommon. So signpost uncommons are designed because every single pack has 3 uncommons in it. This means mathematically you're likely to come across at least 1 2-color uncommon from the set if you have a 6-pack of pre-release cards, or if you're looking through, several dozen packs during a draft. You're gonna come across one of these eventually. And these are exactly what they say. They are guiding posts for you to draft decks around. So Sir Vondam, who I am going to be building a deck around, has Death Touch and Lifelink, so he's already hard to deal with, and he gives all of your other creatures 1/0 and also Death Touch whenever they swing. The signpost one for artifacts is Memnon the Uthros Exile. He's got flying, which is one of the most powerful archetypes in all of draft, and whenever an artifact you control enters, you can put a 1/1 counter on a creature, usually himself. And hell, a friend of mine actually got 2 of these in his pre-release kit, and it performed pretty well for him in his first ever pre-release. Then as you go down, the Golgari one, who I also really want to make, is not a commander. This is just the Seed Ship Brood Tender, a card that has now made it into my Disa deck, a card that can mill multiple cards and then revive cards from your grave. But the one that I got that piloted me to a almost undefeated status in my pre-release was Haliya Ascendent Cadet. Whenever she enters or attacks, we get to put a 1/1 counter on a creature we control. Not that big a deal, and for 5 mana, that's really not doing a whole lot. But the second ability, where you can draw a card if a creature with a 1/1 counter deals damage to a player, is fantastic. Now in draft, this is a middling ability that is powerful because of the limited environment. You may draw an extra card every now and again, and because nobody has access to good engines, this is a powerful draw engine. But in Commander, this thing is insane. You see, in a game of Commander, Haliya has the added benefit of having 3 people to attack, and any ability that says 1 or more creatures deal combat damage to player, while you may only get the ability from 1 creature, you do get it from 1 creature per player. So we get a maximum of 6 potential draws from this. It's 6 potential because if we have first strike or double strike, we get to add extra draws on top of this. All creatures hitting at once will only ever draw us 1 card, but a bunch of creatures hitting with double strike will draw us 2 cards per player. This means that her ability can scale really, really well for a table, and as a result, I wanted to build her as a commander deck. And if you want to see how that went, I'll have a link in the description to Chaos Commander's video. Well, it's a live stream VOD, but it may become a video at some point, who knows, maybe I'll be lucky, where I actually played my Haliya deck, a fuller power version of it, at a table where we were all playing Edge of Eternities Commanders. This also featured Strixhaven Dropout, a writer from EDH Rec, and Kincaid, who focuses on Bracket 1 decks and actually brought Memnon as his Bracket 1 deck to bring to our table. And this game was a lot of fun, and I think you guys will really enjoy checking it out. But as for me, I want to talk about my new Paladin lady. Yeah, I know, Paladin ladies in Suris, it is a weakness of mine, but I am entirely okay with that, and I can admit that full stop. So, Haliya Ascendant Cadet. We've already gone over what she does, and we've already gone how we plan to exploit her. We want to draw 3 cards a turn with her, but because she costs 5 mana, she doesn't really have the ability to come down on curve very easily. This means we're gonna have to rely on something kind of agitating, and that is the 99 of our deck. Now, I know, the 99 of a commander deck is something that every commander player seems to be completely allergic to. Hell, I've fought players using Haliya of the Vast, and when their commander dies twice, they say their entire deck stops working, and I'm like, you played Mana Rocks. Why don't you just play any of those angels in your hand manually? But again, people seem allergic to be doing that. So let's just go ahead and see what we can do with this deck. So we are focusing on 1/1 counters, and 1/1 counters are far stronger when they are amplified. Real quick pitch, if you like watching people play video games, I do a lot of that over on my Twitch channel. I was recently playing Donkey Kong over there, and it's been an interesting experience. I also occasionally do Magic Arena over there if that's your jam. But honestly, since you're over here, if you haven't already, please consider going down and clicking the like button and also the subscribe button. It helps me out a ton as a content creator and makes it easier to get more content out there in front of more people's eyes if you like seeing people run budget builds. If you want to support me financially, there are a couple of ways to do so. There's obviously Patreon, which is down here, but you can also pick up my channel playmat over it with the link in the description below. And there's also my mana pool link where you can get all kinds of sealed product as well as a ton of singles if that is what you are looking for. That all said, I appreciate your time, and let's get right back into the video. So let's go ahead and take a look here. We're going to have 4 cards in the deck that focus on amplifying the amount of 1/1 counters we have. I'm so happy that we no longer have Hardened Scales as a $8 card. That's how much it costed me when I bought it for my Modern deck. It's had enough printings in Commander that it's now a much cheaper card. And while I want these cards in the deck, and it does mean that we don't get to make this a $15 deck, this has to be a $20 deck, I still think that a $20 deck is well enough a budget deck that anybody could afford it. So Hardened Scales here says if we get a 1/1 counter put on a creature, then we get to put that many 1/1 counters, a +1, on it instead. Lizelle, Blacketh's Champion, does effectively the same thing for our deck, and she's probably the most expensive card we've got in here. Then we have Conclave Mentor, which again does the same thing, but gives us some life gain later if need be, and Master Chef, which actually gives us the ability to get a 1/1 counter on a creature anytime it enters the battlefield. But it's in the additional category because it's only going to work when our commander is out, unlike the cards in our giving counters section of the deck. These are all cards that independently can grant counters to anything on our board based on circumstance. So if you play Pioneer or have been a player in Standard, you're probably going to recognize this first one, Luminarch Aspirant. Luminarch Aspirant can give a creature 1/1 at the end or at the beginning of your combat. It's a very simple effect, but given that our commander sees this and says, ooh, looky, draw, we can actually make a lot of use of this. And if you've ever played Pioneer, you're probably used to seeing Siege Veteran at some point. Or at least if you've played Pioneer at my locals with me, because I used to play a 1/1 counters centered Coco deck in the Pioneer tournaments, and Siege Veteran was my top end next to the Luminarch Aspirant, giving me extra ways to distribute 1/1 counters. It's effectively another Luminarch Aspirant that also can make soldier tokens if a non-token soldier dies. Now, that second ability doesn't have much use for us, but sometimes we have things that look kind of like soldiers, like Juniper Order Ranger. When this enters the battlefield, or another creature enters the battlefield, we put a 1/1 counter on that creature, and then we get an extra 1/1 counter on the Juniper Order Ranger. So it comes out, does nothing, another creature comes out, this gets a 1/1 counter, and that thing gets a 1/1 counter. It's a Hardened Scales that also gets bigger on its own. Then we have Renata and Good Fortune Unicorn. These both throw 1/1 counters onto any creature that comes onto the board. Loyal Guardian, which can put a 1/1 counter on each creature we have at the beginning of combat. Grateful Apparition, which can draw us, not draws a card, but proliferate. Sorry, I'm getting mixed up. It proliferates the 1/1 counters on our board. And Metastatic Angel, which proliferates the 1/1 counters on our board when another creature touches the board. Then we have Reluctant Role Model, which allows our creatures to divvy their 1/1 counters amongst themselves when they die. And Mycaeus the Lunarch, who can distribute 1/1 counters onto our entire board. So anything that Luminarch Aspirant can do, you just throw her counters onto Mycaeus, and then Mycaeus will throw that counter onto everything else on the board. He's honestly kind of nutty. But there are some cards that are very greedy about their 1/1 counters, and I want to talk about those as well. So we have 6 cards that I will call our greedy 1/1 counters holders, and they are Enduring Scale Lord. Anytime one or more 1/1 counters get put on anything else, the Scale Lord will get one. Botanical Brawler does the same thing, but in miniature. Basking Brood Scale. When another 1/1 counter is put on it, you create an Eldrazi spawn that can ramp us, but also can hold 1/1 counters for things like our Siege Rhino. Then we have one with the Kami, which says anytime the enchanted creature with this dies, or another creature that is modified dies, we get to make X 1/1 colorless spirit creature tokens, where X is that creature's power. This does have flash. So, what are we using this for? Well, we are weak to board wipes, and unlike higher budget versions of this deck, we can't afford things like Heroic Intervention or Teferi's Protection to keep our board nice and stable. So one with the Kami instead gives us the ability to tell our opponents, hey buddy, our entire board just became a bunch of 1/1s, and we're going to give them 1/1 counters later anyway, so they're always going to be nice, big, and relevant. Then we have Forgotten Ancient. Whenever a player casts a spell, it gets a 1/1 counter, and we can distribute those 1/1 counters to other cards if we so choose. And finally, Herd Baloth. Anytime we throw a 1/1 counter on this, we get to make a 4/4 green beast token that can really get out of hand really quickly. Now, honestly, this is enough to build a deck off of, but we're running into one problem. Our deck still needs Evasion, and Evasion is a very easy principle to understand. Anything that allows a creature to evade a blocker gives you Evasion. So, we are going to be running 8 cards that give our creatures some form of evasion or lording. So, for cards that just lord abilities, we have Abzan Battle Priest. This gives all of our creatures lifelink, which is good enough on its own, along with the Envoy of the Ancestors. But after this, we have to worry about a lot of evasion. So Drix Fatemaker, Pride Malkin, and Duskshell Crawler give all of our creatures with counters Trample. The Elite Scale Guard allows us to tap any creatures our opponents might try to block us with, and Abzan Falconeer and Sigarda Summons both give us access to flying if our creatures have counters on them. And finally, we need another way to protect our board a little bit, so there's 2 ways to go about that aside from the replacement effect I showed you earlier. Way number 1 is with flat out protection. Cards like Duty Beyond Death, which lets us sacrifice a creature in order to make all of our creatures indestructible, and then throws a 1/1 counter onto all of them. And cards like Inspiring Call, which lets us look at all of our 1/1 counters on our creatures, draw a card for every creature with a counter, and then make them all indestructible. Then we have recursion effects like Together Forever, so that if a creature dies, we can immediately put it back in our hand if it had a counter, and Evolution Witness, which every time it gets a counter, lets us put a card from our graveyard back into our hand. And that's a whole lot for the core strategy, and I do think we are going to be sacrificing a little bit in the other areas where our deck could otherwise be very powerful, but I think you're going to find that it's well worth it with this version of the deck. That said, let's talk about card draw so that we can get into what else the deck needs to be doing. We're going to be running 9 cards that allow us to draw, with our commander, of course, being the 10th card. Though one of these cards doesn't really draw us cards, per se. It just gives us 1 bit of card draw. But let's go ahead and begin. Armorcraft Judge draws us a card for every creature with a 1/1 counter. The Tawashi Guidebot allows us to draw a card, and then it costs less for every modified creature we have. The Melt Strider Uologist says whenever a creature we control with a 1/1 counter dies, we get to draw a card. Honor puts a 1/1 counter on a creature, and then we draw a card. Lifecaster's Bestiary allows us to draw a card if we pay 1 extra mana into every creature we play. The Dusk Legion Duelist lets us draw a card every time we put a 1/1 counter on it. The Daedrin Synthesis Amalgam has Trample and can throw away 1/1 counters on our board to not only create tokens, but also let us draw cards. Lenoir, the Autumn Sovereign, allows us to draw a card so long as we have a bunch of creatures with different powers, which is easy to do when we have so many 1/1 counters. And then finally, we have Kutzel, the Malamut Exemplar. Not only does this prevent us from having to worry about our opponents using cards like Fog, Kutzel also has the added ability to make sure that our opponents will see a second copy of our commander effectively. Kutzel has the same ability as our commander, allowing us to draw cards when creatures with 1/1 counters punch our opponents. It functionally works the same. It is worded differently, but don't get pedantic with me. Or do get pedantic with me in the comments section. I absolutely adore all of the fights that happen in there. Anyway, let's go ahead and get into the next section. We need to talk about removal. We're going to run 9 cards that give us access to removal in the deck. And then we're going to run a couple of board wipes on top of that, allowing us to have access to 11 cards that give us straight up removal. Lower than normal, but we are an aggro deck, so we are sacrificing a bit of our ability to fight for the ability to pressure. Anyways, let's go to the first card, Signature Slam. Puts a 1/1 counter on a creature and then causes all of our modified creatures to punch one thing in the throat. Carnivorous Counterpie allows us to blow up an artifact, enchantment, or a creature with flying and then proliferate. Cankerbloom gives us the option of blowing up those things or proliferating. Seed Ship Impact destroys an artifact or enchantment and then gives us access to ramp if the thing was small. Smell Fear lets us proliferate and then make a creature fight. Scavenging Ooze allows us to throw things out of our opponent's graveyards away and also put 1/1 counters on it. Hopeful Initiate allows us to remove 1/1 counters from our board to blow up artifacts or enchantments. Stroke Your Midnight allows you to blow up any problematic card that isn't a land, and Requisition Raid allows us to blow up an artifact and an enchantment and put a 1/1 counter on every creature we control all at once. Honestly, I wish this thing was an instant because it is just super powerful on its own. Then we need to move into our board wipes, and they're pretty simple. Vanquish the Horde to get rid of a big board if we have to, and an Austere Command to give us access to modal removal, blowing up artifacts, enchantments, creatures with mana value 3 or less, or creatures with mana value 4 or greater. Now, there is a cool thing that happens with Austere Command. These abilities happen in sequential order, so if we are talking about a creature that has an enchantment or an artifact on it that gives it indestructible, the Austere Command can actually blow up that protection piece before blowing up the creature. This actually came up at a Taco Mat game of mine recently, and I thought it was a really funny way to kill somebody's Sigarda. Anyway, that all said, that's it for our removal. Now let's talk about mana. I'm normally a fan of running 10 ramp in a deck, or 12 if I can manage it, but for this deck we are going to be running a little less than normal because we are going to be a very low to the ground deck and we can afford to have a little less ramp. We also have some lander token shenanigans in some of our other cards, so it's not the worst thing in the world. First things first, we're going to be running Font of Fertility, which has the exact same effect as Wayfarer's Bauble, and, well, kind of the same effect as Sakura Tribe Elder. All of these sacrifice themselves in order to get a basic land from our deck onto the battlefield. Rampant Growth does the same thing, but just for 2 mana. And then we have Hamza, who people keep on asking me to make a deck about for PDH, but I don't play PDH, so I'm sorry. But Hamza allows us to discount all of our creatures based on the amount of creatures with 1/1 counters, and Hamza himself gets discounted for all of our creatures with 1/1 counters. Then we have Search for Tomorrow to get a land out of our deck and get it onto the battlefield untapped. We can also play it on turn 1, thankfully. And then finally, we have Rishkar, Incubation Druid, and Gyre Sage, who are all mana dorks that get way better when there are 1/1 counters being tossed around the board. Then, for our lands, we are going to be running 12 forests and 9 plains, as we want to always lean on where our ramp is. Then we are going to be running 10 dual lands, with the most expensive one price-wise being the Sun Petal Grove at 40 cents. I hope you can afford 40 cents. Then we have Command Tower, Exotic Orchard, Canopy Vista, Fortified Village, and Sungrass Prairie as our untapped lands, with our tapped lands being Scattered Groves so that we don't mana flood, Temple of Plenty for the early game scry, Radiant Grove so that we don't run out of forest plains to search out of our deck with fetching, and Selesnya Sanctuary to reset any of our very important effects that are strapped to utility lands. Then we have the fetching lands of Evolving Wilds, Terramorphic Expanse, and Myriad Landscape, with our utility lands being Pit of Offerings to get rid of problematic cards in the graveyard, Windbrisk Heights and Mosswort Bridge to give us access to free spells, and a Demolition Field to blow up any problematic lands. This is a deck that loses to Maze of Ith and other similar effects that can stop us from attacking, so it's a good idea to keep this card in mind. And that does it for the entirety of the deck. Hopefully you understand how to play it, but if not, let's run over a quick scenario in the gameplay section. Looking at this opening hand, I'm actually kind of okay with it. It's got a lot of lands and a Gyre Sage, but with Kutzel here as well as our commander, we'll be able to draw through a lot of the problems later on in the game. So let's go ahead and draw our opening card, play a Myriad Landscape down, and pass to our opponents. Turn 2 is honestly self-explanatory. We play Sakura Tribe Elder, wait for our opponents to try to swing at us, block if we have to, and sack it at the end of an opponent's turn. Turn 3 is also pretty simple. We drew a Renata, so we played it down. We played our Canopy Vista because our commander does cost 2 white, and we passed to our opponents. Turn 4 is also pretty simple. We play our commander down, it gets a 1/1 counter from Renata, and then it grants a 1/1 counter to Renata. Now we have a devotion of 3. If our opponents do not have a blocker out, Renata swings at them to draw us a card, but we are running under the assumption that they do at least have a blocker. For turn 5, we went ahead and played a Gyre Sage and then Hansa so that we could ramp into anything we possibly could want later on in the game, and we went ahead and swung Haliya and Renata both at the same player, hoping that they would choose to not block both of them, as I'm just assuming they just needed their resources. We also chose to play our tapped land that we drew because our mana is all tapped at this point. Also, by playing the Gyre Sage before the Hansa, we were able to get an evolve trigger on the Gyre Sage, so now it will tap for a lot of mana in our next turn. Assuming we drew a card from Haliya and Renata, we have a Basking Broodscale, and turn 6 begins with us having a Seed Ship Impact. Turn 6, we get to clear whatever the biggest threat on the board is away using Signature Slam. Because we get to play the Basking Broodscale down, it gets a 1/1 counter from Renata and immediately spits out a new Eldrazi token. The Signature Slam will put another Eldrazi token onto the battlefield by putting another 1/1 counter onto the Basking Broodscale, and then when we swing with Haliya and everybody else, the Basking Broodscale will get yet another 1/1 counter. We also played Cutzel during this turn so that we can get extra draws off of our things. If we've blown up the most problematic thing in the board state, we can assume that we are at least drawing 2 cards at this point, potentially even 4 if one opponent does not have the right amount of blockers. And this gives us a very good set of moves. We can go ahead and tap 1 and go ahead and play the Mel Strider Duologist, so that if our board gets blown up, we will be able to draw a ton of cards as a result. We are in turn 7, and we had a lot of lands out, so we went ahead and just played another land, and I think the best thing to do is to just swing everything willy-nilly at our opponents. It doesn't really matter if they block any of our stuff. We have an Inspiring Call we can use to keep our entire board safe. We are basically swinging with no abandon whatsoever if our opponents try to do anything silly. Because of the sheer amount of creatures we're swinging with, it's a guarantee that we're going to be able to draw 6 cards from this, and with all those 6 cards being drawn, well, we've got a ton of plays we have access to. For my part, I think the correct thing is cracking our Myriad Landscape, playing the Search for Tomorrow, because that gives us exactly 3 lands we can hold up while discarding the excess lands we do not need, and then we can pass to our opponents. The reason we're keeping 3 lands up and available is because we do have Inspiring Call in the hand to protect us from a board wipe, and we also have a Seed Ship Impact, so that if our opponents were to try to do anything silly, we can just blow up a problematic enchantment on the board. Assuming an opponent does need to blow up our board, we are going to use Inspiring Call to keep it together, and that does give us access to, 10 cards worth of draw? So that's starting our next turn with a ton of cards, and then we get to open up with this. This means our turn is as simple as playing an Abzan Falconeer, giving our entire board flying as a result, and now that our entire board has flying, the likelihood that our opponents are going to be able to do anything about it is so nightmarishly small that we have effectively won the game at this point. And we even have one with the Kami in the hand, so if our opponents were to do anything silly at all, we would just play this and draw a card, not just draw a card, but get a 1/1 token for all the counters on our board that we have created. Honestly, this one with the Kami is going to pull us into a very powerful spot if need be. Also, because we have the Eldrazi spawns right here, we can keep up only 1 green mana, and the one with the Kami will work perfectly fine. And actually, we only needed 1 mana for the Abzan Falconeer because of Hamza. So, one with the Kami, we can sacrifice these 3 Eldrazi spawns to play one with the Kami on something, and then when everything dies, we will create a ton of extra tokens immediately and just be perfectly safe. This allows us to bait out our opponents because they won't see a single green mana being up as enough of a reason not to try to blow up our board. And yet we have the answer in our hand that we could just go, okay, cool, you board wiped, and we ended up with like 15 or 16 extra creatures, and now we're going to throw 1/1 counters on them. It's honestly a nutty play that I'm super happy we have access to in this deck. And that puts us at turn 8, where we are able to pull off not only a ton of card draw, but also getting rid of any opponent that we need to, as long as they're not playing a ton of life gain. Though if they are playing a ton of life gain, we're just going to go ahead and knock them out with the commander primarily. So let's talk about what you would do if you had a little bit of extra scratch to put some more money into this deck. If you're choosing to upgrade this deck, one of the first cards I would go for is the new Earth Crystal from Final Fantasy. Its ramp, as well as the ability to throw extra 1/1 counters onto things because of the Hardened Scales ability, and the ability to put 1/1 counters on creatures on your board all at once. I would also add in Kadama of the West Tree, as it does give you access to a lot of ramp early on, which is incredibly helpful. Coiled Great Worm gives you tons of extra counters throughout a game. Mana Gorger Hydra can be a one-stop shop to closing out the game on an opponent's face. Loading Zone is the cheapest doubling season for counters we have ever seen, and I think that more people should be looking into this card. It costs 1 more mana than a Branching Evolution, but it does the same thing, if not more. Champion of Landholt is another great way to have Evasion in the deck. Between this, Abzan Falconeer, and Sigarda's summons, it's way harder for your opponents to stop your cards. Sovereign Okinakahu allows us to get effectively a doubling season whenever we swing with our stuff. Terra Symbiosis gives us another way to draw lots of cards. Kami of Whispered Hope's one of the best ramp cards a 1/1 counter deck can possibly have access to. Sphere Grid is just fantastic from the new Final Fantasy set, giving us access to trample and extra counters. Gavity Township's a great utility land that will give you access to more 1/1 counters. Innkeeper's Talent gives you access to more counters as well. Ouroboros does the same thing. And finally, an Ozolith, which can make you have a very easy Voltron victory. I actually don't think Ozolith is super necessary in this deck. I just like it because I play Hardened Scales in Modern, so I always like having access to an Ozolith in a counters deck if I can afford it. Now, granted, I have extra ones because I had to have a playset for my Modern deck, and my Modern deck only runs 2 or 3 Ozoliths now, so I always have a 4th just floating around ready to go into a deck. So thankfully, I do have one. If you don't have one, though, again, don't sweat it. It's a $40 card. If you're not playing a competitive format, you don't need to be buying a $40 card for your casual commander deck. I don't think it's that necessary. That all said, if you enjoyed this deck, please let me know in the comments section below. I really would like to know what your thoughts are down there, and if there are any commanders from Edge of Eternities you want me to cover. I'm going to be covering more commanders from not only this, but a couple of more Final Fantasy commanders here in the future, and then I might get back to some of the other stuff on my backlog. I still know that I need to be doing that Greasefang deck, and I'm sorry that I haven't got to it yet. There's just been a lot of stuff going on. That said, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate each and every one of you, and hopefully I'll see you all in the next one. Hey, thanks for making it to the end of the video. I really could not do any of this without all of you. Those of you watching, and especially those of you who support me on Patreon. I wanted to go ahead and take a minute to thank all of you who do that, because with YouTube being what it is these days, I really cannot do this full time without the support from each and every one of you. Those people would be Red Joker, Purple Poundini, Jemshin, Blitzkrieg, Jupe the Malignant, Michael, Ravalern, Mabbity Babbity, Astral Frontier, Tales of Atonement, Nixie Chan, Kiri Artemis, Limor Pinku, Love Bunny Games, Victorian Alchemist, I'm not saying the last part of that, and you know that, Aurora, Leela Ururaka, Arcton Arclacier, Kiratorian, Dren Hadamata, Jordan M, John L, Lord Bleck, Smiling Game Master, and Fireshard. Thank you so very much. But since you're here, why not go ahead and try watching another one? There should be one that's on the screen right now. And if you are a patron of mine, I wanted to go ahead and thank you again for all of your support. There is still a video you could press, though, if you'd like. I would appreciate it just a little bit.